Spirit of God who moves within us, who has carried culture and society forward for thousands and thousands of years. We ask that you would help us hear the words today, understand the insights that you might have for us through them. In Christ's name we pray, amen. The text for today's sermon is Psalm 1. This is a sermon request. I've been asked to talk about what it means to meditate on the law day and night. Unfortunately, Carla, who requested it, is not here. Dick is very sick. He's in hospice, and saw him on Friday, but I do want you to know, he's at peace. So, hard time, but still, he's at peace. In any case, let me read the text. I'm going to read a straight translation here. Later in the sermon, I'm going to read my translation. Happy are those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or take the path that sinners tread, or sit in the seat of scoffers, but their delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law they meditate day and night. They are like trees planted by streams of water, which yield their fruit in season, and their leaves do not wither. In all that they do, they prosper. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment time, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of our God stands forever. Have you noticed how often we're all on autopilot? Just not thinking things through, just kind of reacting to things based on maybe how we used to act or the way we've been formed. Some of that's good, okay? The moment we hear Dick Grokenberger's sick, or that Carla's daughter Kim is sick, I'm getting calls from people, what can I do to help? Okay, so some of that's good. I was listening to somebody talk about he had an accident somewhere in South Carolina, and immediately people stopped, wanted to help. Didn't ask who he was, didn't ask what he believed, didn't ask where he stood, nothing. Just came to help. So it can be good, but sometimes it just plain goes off the rails. Our grandson, Jack, sophomore in college, came out to visit us this week, and on the plane, it was a little delayed, and they finally got on the plane, and they did all the safety information, all that, and they were about to back away, and it turned out there was something mechanical wrong. Bummer. So they said it'd be about 20 minutes to fix it, but when they do that, they open the door again, and people can get out in it. In any case, about 20 minutes later, they closed the door, and per FAA regulations, they started the safety information again. Some woman in the back of the plane went ballistic. Get us out of here! She was cussing and yelling. And so the air marshal had to come and get her off the plane. No filter, autopilot, reaction. I'm sure there's no one here like that. Never had a moment like that. On the other hand, maybe if you're accused of something, autopilot defend. Autopilot blame someone else. Autopilot excuse, do something. Maybe you're criticized, so you might argue. Or maybe your autopilot makes you shrink at that moment and fall backwards. Maybe you get angry or hurt and want to lash out because someone you know, you're close to, your spouse, your sister, your brother, keeps doing that thing they always do, That thing they always do that annoys them. And that's why they're doing it too, right? Just to annoy you. Maybe not. Maybe it's just a question of personality type. We're all different. Carl Jung put together this theory that had 4 sort of typologies that had to do with your personality. The one I pay attention to is what's J and P, and it doesn't matter what the words mean. And the reason I pay attention is because my wife is a J and I'm a P, and we have to work on these differences. So I swear to you, I do not leave the cupboard doors open in the kitchen to annoy her. That's not why I do it. I just leave them open. That's the way it is. I'm the kind of person that can change my plans on a dime without any upset at all. Most of the world, about 70%, has difficulty with that. They like structure, they like order. I try to fake it. Barbara gave me this great little cartoon, kind of a cartoon, that says, my calendar makes it look like I have everything under control. But I ignore it and treat every day like the emergency it is. You can be different that way, just different types. Some reactions, though, run deeper. And I have to use myself as an example because I don't want to use anybody else. I've told you some of this, I think I mentioned that my dad was extraordinarily critical of me. Can't recall a compliment until maybe he was 100. Part of that is personality type. He's a 1 on the Enneagram personality type test, and they tend to be a little critical. And my mom? Well, when I was emotional as a little guy, basically what she said to me is, be like your father. But I'm like you, Mom! I'm emotional, and you're raised that way, and that can create a kind of wound. It wasn't deliberate. They thought they were doing the right thing. They were trying. Difference between a good parent and a bad parent. Good parents try. They were trying. But it did have it had an effect on my autopilot, how I respond to people when they resist the direction I want to go. It's difficult. Mom did some other things with my autopilot that were a little better. I'm not so quick to judge. I usually can put myself in someone else's shoes. That's also my autopilot right now. Not perfect, but that's the direction. But we all have those things that live in us, that create our autopilot corrections. And if you have no idea what yours are, then you're susceptible to manipulation. The unexamined life just goes the way it goes. And it's difficult to grow and do things differently. Autopilot makes you susceptible to the manipulation of the world around you. Why is it that we need our phones 24/7? When did that happen? I remember resisting it. Do you? Remember resisting it? And it's been happening for years and years. Another story about my mom. Remember when we had rotary phones? Those of you who don't, you've probably seen them in movies. Okay? They were kind of a pain. You dial the number. Okay, I get it. And at one point, push-button phones came out. Everybody had to have a push-button phone. Even if they only made 2 calls a week, they still had to have a push-button phone. Now, my mom at the time was making probably 20 calls a day. She was calling through that church list day after day, inviting people to things. That's why I say my mother founded that church, okay? Constantly, but she had a rotary phone. At one point, the session said, Betty, really, you're doing a lot of work for it. We should get you a push-button phone. And she said, my last hold on poverty. It's possible to resist, but she did eventually get a push-button phone. We do get manipulated by our culture, and there's one way in which we're getting manipulated now that's, I find, deeply disturbing. Outrage. There is outrage everywhere. Our president made a speech at the end of the week, and I've seen outrage clips come out of it. On the one hand, he's going to find a way to cancel the elections. On the other, the Chinese are coming for us. Maybe little bits of truth in those things. He does cancel the elections. Let's go to the streets, all right? But really, outrage. The things I'm looking at, they're built to make me feel awful, to raise my ire. Then there's a corollary to this outrage. it is apparently okay to throw people away. To just throw people away. They don't live up to your standards, just get rid of them. Right? So I've heard people say that the MAGA voting farmers who are struggling right now, well, they got it coming. How could you think any differently? Deplorable. We have a farmer in this congregation. She's not here with us today because her family farm's in trouble. But our reaction doesn't necessarily think about that part. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe we think about immigrants. They're illegal. Who cares if they're suffering? Outrage and throw them out, don't care about them. Don't make it's part of this autopilot we seem to be on. It's acceptable to throw it. It reminds me of my grandmother Hoffman, who was angry at her sister Trey because Trey apparently went off to college and then stayed away an extra couple of years, and so grandmother couldn't leave. So she, 97 years old, my mother said to grandmother, "Don't you think you should forgive Trey at this point?" "I do forgive Trey, just never want to talk to her again." Autopilot. Built inside what we think is acceptable or not. And the psalmist is going to call that the path that sinners tread, that autopilot. You know why I know? Because we're not happy. Our society's not happy. Now, happy's an interesting word in this spot. Doesn't mean yay. It's a little bit more like Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. Flourishing, fulfilled, and sometimes you might call it blessed. And by blessed, it means you feel like you have the wind of God at your back. That this is the place where you feel complete and whole. We're not happy. How about you? Happy? Fulfilled? Flourishing? Feel blessed? Sometimes I do feel that way. People ask me how I'm doing, meaning close friends I haven't talked to in a while. I say, man, this is a good season. I've had bad seasons, but this is a pretty good season in my life. But is my relationship to Barbara flourishing and fulfilled the way it might be? Well, we're doing pretty well, but from time to time, probably a good idea for me to ask the question, how can I draw closer to you and be more intimate that we might flourish as a couple? We do from time to time. How about to the rest of your family? Flourishing? Fulfilled? Or is there some room for growth somewhere? How about friends? Have people offended you, taken something from you, and your reaction was push away out of that sense of hurt? Are you happy? How about in this church? I won't talk about this church right now, but I'll talk about my first church, the Adelphi Presbyterian Church. Great bunch of people. I think I've told you 67% had somebody in their immediate family who'd been hospitalized for a mental illness. And they wanted to be friends with people, but they wanted to hold you right there. Not out here, right there, no closer. Were they flourishing? Was there an intimacy there that would allow people to be comforted and become whole? There was room to change the autopilot a bit. We need to recalibrate, is what I'm saying. Our society, is it really flourishing, fulfilling? What's our role in it? We need to recalibrate, and the thing is we can. Neuroscientists tell us we can. If I can train my brain to stop feeling chronic pain, I can probably learn not to react to every slight that comes my way. You too. And the thing is, the Bible knows this too. The Bible knows it. Psalm 1 offers it to us. What do? You meditate on the law day and night. Other places, you become transformed in your mind in Romans 12. You seek the gifts of the Spirit. There are ways that we can shift and change and grow. Now, this line, on his law, they meditate day and night. This is a poem. So let's not get too crazy about whether or not we have to have, I don't know, a tape playing as we're sleeping or something like that. That's not what this is about. So let's first talk about what the law is. The word in the text is Torah, but by this time, when this psalm was put in the Psalter, it was bigger than that. It was also the reflections on Torah that we see in the writings in the Hebrew Scriptures and the prophets that we see. All those reflections helping us to see and understand who God is and how God works in our lives. As Christians, we take the Christian Scriptures, the New Testament, and they're part of Torah. The overarching view of who God is and how our autopilot might change if we have God living within and have that forefront. The word for meditate here is actually murmur. Always talking about, what we're talking about here is formation. That it's so much a part of you that you are formed by this beautiful gift that's been given to us in the Scriptures, formed by the presence of a God that lives within us that these Scriptures tell us about. An incredible gift that can change our autopilot for sure. Let me read a slightly different version. Flourishing and fulfilled are those who do not follow the advice of the wicked or take the path that sinners tread or sit in the seat of scoffers, but their satisfaction is in the Lord's instruction. And that instruction forms their character. They're like trees planted by streams of water which yield their fruit in its season, and their leaves do not wither. In all that they do, they are fulfilled. The wicked are not so. Two ways. Can we reform, recalibrate our autopilot is the question before us. It is not easy. It takes effort. It takes a willingness to recognize that your current autopilot ain't much good in some ways. It takes effort, but it is incumbent upon every faithful person to engage in the process of growing into a life that is formed by God's instruction and Torah. Incumbent upon us to do it. Do you all know Torah? Do you all have a real sense of the scope of God's instruction to us? Without being overly critical, I'm going to have to say no. And the reason I'm saying it is because the modern Christian church, completely inadequate to the task before it. We got to face it. We have not had the strength or the inspiration to have a serious impact on a culture that's autopilot is about outrage and cancel. It's going to take work. That's the way it is. But do you know Torah? How about the Bible? Do you know why there are 4 Gospels? Do you know that they disagree about who Jesus is? Do you know that James and Paul disagree about faith and law and their relationship? Or maybe they even have different understandings of faith and law. Do you know that the Song of Songs doesn't really agree with Leviticus about how we want to approach love? Ideas about sex in Timothy, written probably by a disciple of Paul's, very different than ideas about sex that Paul might have in 1 Corinthians. I, by the way, have been listening to a course at Yale on Introduction to New Testament. I thought I needed a primer, right? A kind of a refresher. That's why these things are coming to mind. I'm about to do one in Hebrew Scriptures too. But, you know, the reality is it's a university course. Every one of you could do it. It's on YouTube. Ask me for the link, I'll send it. Do you know? And the thing is, knowing is more than just having this information. It's wrestling with the scope of belief, the huge conversation that faithful people have been having for centuries, millennia, trying to discern how to form that autopilot, that character that is righteous, that flourishes, that is happy. It requires reflection and examination. But let's give you a couple of hints. As we reflect and we examine, as we compare our lives to the standards that sit, we do so recognizing that God is love, that God's faithfulness in love is constant. So I wouldn't suggest saying, oh dear, my autopilot is off. I'm rotten, I'm horrible. Need to punish myself for this. Not going to work. Instead, maybe you want to say, sweetheart, it's okay. Maybe do a little like Annie Lamott. It's all right. I love you the way you are, but I'm thinking if you shift it a little bit, you'll be happier. Self-compassion is a start towards transformation. Beating up on yourself isn't going to do much at all. Neuroscientists have proved it. It's the way we go. It's the nature of God. Steadfast love surrounding us all the time, which is important because some of the challenges that Torah brings to us may be painful. Has anybody here ignored the plight of the immigrants because you think immigration is a problem? Ignored the cruelty because it's about Torah is going to call you up short and say that's wrong. Have any of you ignored the violent protests that have occurred in this nation? Remember Portland a couple of years ago? Our nephew was there. He's a U.S. Marshal. Now, I know him. All right? This is a guy who understands law enforcement, who wants to do it the right way. He was doxxed. For a year, when he was out of town, there was a marshal outside his house protecting his women and his wife and his kids. We let that go? We don't lift it up. If we ignore those things, then we're dealing with autopilot, the path of the sinners. Because consider the violence and the push, all of that. We worship a Lord who died on a cross rather than foment a violent political rebellion. Are we formed in that? Now, I deliberately picked a couple of things that might poke at you there. Maybe not. And here's what I'd like to say about being formed in the instruction of God. I might be wrong. I might be dead wrong about the things I said. But don't get mad. Talk to me. But let's understand that when we're talking, it doesn't matter what my opinion is, it doesn't matter what your opinion is, the standard is Torah. The standard is the instruction of God. And those are the conversations that we need to have, having compassion for one another as God has for us. That's how we grow and change from the inside out. Sometimes it's hard to resolve. I have a friend, I've mentioned it before, a rabbi, brilliant rabbi, who thinks that polyamory within a committed relationship is an appropriate way to live as a lifestyle. I think he's dead wrong. But the interesting thing is, he will make his case out of Torah. He's not ignoring it. I still think he's wrong, and I'll make my case out of Torah. And the Spirit's going to have to work this out over time. I know sexual mores are culturally contextual. I just have to read the different ones throughout the history of the Scriptures. But I ain't going to throw him out. Not going to throw him out. Plenty of people have, but I'm not going to. It's not the way it works. If we are studying, working, seeking to understand, talking, and I'm here to help anytime, and we bathe all of that in the presence of God in whatever way it is that's good for you. For some, it's being in the midst of nature. For some, it's sitting in the quiet and let everything pass away. For some, it's going deep into the imagination, not fantasy, imagination, and almost conversing with the presence that lives within. But as you bathe it, you can change. You can grow. Brother David Stendelross turned 100 years old yesterday. He's called the grandfather of gratitude. Apparently, he was quite a scurrilous dude when he was a teenager, at least as he tells it. I swear the first time I met him 15 years ago, I wanted to bow down and worship. Because his autopilot had so completely filled with this sense of gratitude in the presence of God. I can understand why people wanted to worship Jesus. I really can. You can change. You can make a difference. Consider it. Imagine how things would shift in your life if you deliberately and carefully sought God's instruction, kindly to yourself, making shifts over time. You'd have an impact on the people around you, those close and those far away. If we can do that as a church, then our faith will become adequate to the task in front of the church right now at a critical moment in history. Things are shifting. We need a different sense of how we react. So, as you imagine how that might be, may I suggest that you spend some time this week setting some sort of a plan in motion. It can't all happen in one day, but something has to happen each day. And the Spirit of God will be there forever, forming your character if you are meditating on the law day and night. Whatever burden weighs you down, whatever flaw, whatever trauma you've experienced or dream that's been left unfulfilled in your life, you can know this. You are an expression of the creative love and power of God. You cannot be separated from God's love. God seeks your perfection and not your destruction.